Welcome back to my series where I'm ranking every single Doctor Who companion. And today we're going to be talking about the 1980s and also the Paul McGann movie. This is such a big stretch of Doctors. You know, the 1980s started with Tom Baker's final season. And we're going to be talking way into the 90s where we're talking about Paul McGann's only TV movie. But this era doesn't really have that big of a companion turnaround, really, if we think about it. You know, a lot of these companions will stay through multiple Doctors. The 1980s was so different for Doctor Who compared to the 60s and the 70s. And the role of the companion shifts so much as this era goes on. You know, we've still got a bit of an overhang of the Tom Baker era at the beginning about how these type of companions interact. And then by the time we get to Ace, it's so different. So I'm really looking forward to talking about these companions, how their role changed over this era, and where they kind of end up in my ranking. So let's just get started. First up, we have Adric. We're starting off pretty low. I'm sorry for putting Adric in the not for me category. Love Matthew Waterhouse. I like parts of Adric, but he does come across as very annoying. And it's not even like really Matthew Waterhouse's fault. It's just the type of character. It's the know-it-all kid. But unlike Zoe, you know, the second Doctor companion, I feel like Matthew Waterhouse didn't really make Adric very likable. He did come across as someone who was a know-it-all and he didn't seem to be funny. You know, that type of character can be funny if there's like a sense of jokiness to it. I don't know. But I don't think Adric was really fleshed out to be like that. But Adric, like some other companions in the earlier run, you know, he started off with Tom Baker and then went to Peter Davison. And his relationship with both Doctors is very similar. Both Doctors don't really seem to like him very much. And they are constantly at odds with each other. They're always arguing and fighting because they both think they're as smart as each other. You know, it does make for an interesting dynamic, but it's not as playful and fun as other companions that are smart as the Doctor. So no, Adric is unfortunately not for me. But his departure in the show is one of the greatest moments in 80s Doctor Who. I think that's a fair statement to say. I think most people would think that's a really great moment and a real shocking moment. And so I still think there's a really important place that Adric has in the show. And I think Adric's death really adds something to the Fifth Doctor's character, and I wish it was explored more on screen. Unfortunately, I think Adric's death is explored too much in Big Finish to the point where it feels comical. I think people are always trying to make up for the lack of TV stuff by mentioning it all the time, and it does come across a bit cheap now. But then again, we're talking about TV, we're not talking about audio, sorry. I'm breaking my own rules. Next up, we have Nyssa, best. Everybody knows that I love Nyssa. It's true, I do love Nyssa. Why? I'll tell you why.
Because?
The thing about Nyssa, look, I'm not entirely sure what it is about Nyssa that appeals to me so much. I think, let's start off with the great stuff. I think it's great. You know, we meet Nyssa in Keeper of Traken, a great story, a beautiful story, and she's brilliant in it. And you really get to know this person, and the Master steals her father's body. It is so horrific and evil. And, you know, Nyssa's whole planet is destroyed. You know, so she, like the Doctor later on when he loses his planet, you know, there's an emotional weight to that. Unfortunately, this is during a time period where the show didn't really explore these things very deeply, but they are underneath the surface of the character of Nyssa. I like that Nyssa is very smart and she can go and do her science stuff. The Doctor trusts her to go and get stuff done. She's someone you can rely on. She's definitely a companion's companion. You know, she gets the job done. Everyone relies on Nyssa and she's happy to do it. The reason why I love Nyssa so much is because I feel like, apart from that, you can project anything onto Nyssa. Her character is so empty that you can add stuff on top of it in order to make her brilliant. This idea that Nyssa is my favorite companion is down to a single screenshot in Arc of Infinity where she is holding up a gun. And to me, this just feels so out of character for her. It feels so silly and so camp that I can't help but love it. I'm just like, what are you doing, girl? And it just makes me laugh. I just think it's so hilarious. It's just not Nyssa. Like, why are they writing her like this? And that's why I love it. That's why I love that moment. And that's why I love Nyssa. I'm easy to please. I'm easy to please. What can I say? Does she really deserve best of the best? Is she up there with someone like Sarah Jane Smith? No. But to me, she is. And it's my ranking list. I can do whatever I like. So I will always stand up for my girl Nyssa. She's that girl. Love her. She's amazing. She can do no wrong. Next up, we have Tegan Jovanka, played by Janet Fielding. Tegan is one of my favorite companions. I'll be honest. This is a real confession to you guys. I do prefer Tegan over Nyssa. I know, shocking. I'm known as loving Nyssa, but Tegan's just better. I love her relationship with the Fifth Doctor. She is so brilliant. I love that she's always been like, this doesn't look like Heathrow to me, Doctor. Love her. I think because she's Australian, there is that extra level of connection to her. She feels so genuinely Aussie. Like, she is a real Aussie ocker. You know, she definitely has that element to her, and that's why I do have a connection to her with that sense. And I also love that she does the true Australian thing where she loves to complain. We are a nation of complainers. You know, the UK are the same. You lot, I know what you're like. You're just as bad as us. We love to complain. It's something that we do really well. And Tegan does it the best. You know, she is always up for a fight with the Doctor. You know, she doesn't take any of his nonsense and she stands up for herself, and she won't do anything she's not comfortable doing. And my favorite thing about Tegan is her departure. That sounds mean, but it's her departure scene where she turns around and she says, this is not fun anymore. This is horrible. All this death. What are we doing here? This used to be fun. In Tegan's first season with the Fifth Doctor, the whole time she's trying to get back home. And by the end of the season, she finally gets back there and she gets left behind and she realizes what she's missed. She realized that she's like, actually, that experience in the TARDIS was kind of incredible and I loved it. And I didn't appreciate it when I was there. So when she got a chance to rejoin the Doctor, she was so happy. And you feel that this reinvigorated sense of like, I'm happy I'm back, but I'm still the same person. I'm still going to be like, no, you can't be doing all that, Doctor. She's still the same character, but she's happy to be there. And when we get to her final story, where she turns around to the Doctor and says, you know what? This stopped being fun. It's changed. This isn't what I signed up for. And, you know, she's looking around her and she's seeing all the death and destruction and the horrible things that are happening. And she has her own agency in that moment. And she says, you know what? It's time to go. And I love that. And I think that's what makes her character feel so real. So yeah, Tegan, top of the top. And it's another thing as well, you know, she's with the Fifth Doctor throughout pretty much his entire era as well. And there's that real sense of connection when a companion and Doctor stays for so long. Next up, we have Turlough, and he's okay. You know, I like this interesting idea of, you know, he's been recruited by the Black Guardian to destroy the Doctor. And that internal conflict of like, what should I do? Should I kill the Doctor? Am I on the Doctor's side? Because I like him and he's interesting and I'm under control of the Black Guardian. What do I do? And that stuff is really interesting. And then after that story arc is kind of resolved, he kind of sticks around. And I just don't really love him in it too much. Yeah, so I'm not the biggest fan of Turlough. I do like him in the Five Doctors. I think he's funny. When they're in the TARDIS, it's like, oh, what should we do? And he's like, die. Camp. Excellent. Brilliant. You know, he's such a doomer. But I think that's the problem as well. You've got Tegan, who's a bit of a doomer. You've got the Fifth Doctor, who gets really exhausted by his companions. And then you've got Turlough, who's also a doomer. You know, you've got a lot of negative energy in the TARDIS. We need a little bit of lightness. We need someone who's happy to be there. And I think that's why Nyssa is so loved in this era by me and hopefully other people, because she does bring a sense of lightness to a lot of conflict. I think good TV and good drama needs conflict. Not everyone can be best mates and gets along, but there needs to be some levity. There needs to be some levity in it as well, or it just gets a bit depressing. Next up, we have Kamelion. Unfortunately, Kamelion is also just not for me. I don't really love the idea or the execution of his character. It definitely feels like a producer coming in and saying, oh, wouldn't it be marvelous if we had this robot on the show? Wouldn't that be excellent? And then realizing that technology just isn't at the point where this robot can really do what a piece of television needs to do. It comes from a place of marketing rather than a place of like practical filmmaking. For a show like Doctor Who, that is really technical and really difficult to make, to put in an effect as a character is so hard. It is such a difficult thing to ask of a production crew. And I really think it was a mistake. And I think they quickly learned it was a mistake. And yeah, unfortunately, Kamelion just doesn't do much for me. Next up, we have Peri. Now, Peri travels with the 5th and 6th Doctors. So, she's another one of those companions that bridges the gap. And her relationship with the 5th Doctor and 6th Doctor are so radically different. With the 5th Doctor, it's sweet and kind, and there's this real sense of levity again. That's what I was talking about earlier. There wasn't that much lightness. And it was so nice to get two people who genuinely seemed to get along, and it seemed a bit more friendly. And then that doesn't last very long as soon as the Doctor regenerates and she travels with the 6th Doctor. And things make a really big turn for the worst. There is a real negative energy between the two of them. And poor Peri suffers so much under the 6th Doctor. I don't mind that the Doctor and Peri are at odds with each other a lot. Like I've said many times in this series, I like when there's tension between the Doctor and companion. I think it makes for good drama. But when it gets to the point where it's abusive and just cruel, it's really hard to watch. And I think more often than not, it's abusive rather than playful jabs. The Doctor strangles Peri. He berates her and he insults her appearance and makes her feel so small. And it's really, really horrible. And I don't think Doctor Who at this time period is the type of show that knew how to tackle relationships like this. A show that can talk about when we first met, it was great. We were like best mates. And then you turn into this horrible person who treated me terribly. It really is horrible to look at. I think it's important that we look at the 6th Doctor and Peri and say, that's not right. There's something wrong here. And it's sad because Peri as an individual is such a nice person. She's such a good person. She's really loving and she's caring. She loves her plants. She's a botanist. But yeah, I love Peri as a character. And those moments where the Doctor and Peri are nicer to each other is bliss. And it's so nice. But it's hard not to think of the Doctor and Peri without thinking of the abuse. Because that's what it is. It was an abusive relationship. And we saw that on our television screens and said this was okay. And I don't really love that in Doctor Who. And you can see why people were turned off by this era. And I don't think it's down to the performances. I think Colin and Nicola did an amazing job as the Doctor and Peri, but it was the direction the show was heading in that was probably a direction it never should have thought about entering in the first place. Next up, we have Mel. Mel is a really odd companion from Doctor Who because she is very much like the stereotypical idea of what a companion is. If you've ever seen a Doctor Who parody, Mel is pretty much what they're doing. She comes across as very ditzy, she screams a lot, and she finds herself in weird scenarios that she probably shouldn't have gotten herself into in the first place. And she's very much there to be like, what's that over there, Doctor? And it sucks. And I think the reason Mel is like this, because unlike other Doctor Who companions from the classic series, Mel didn't get to have a proper introduction story. And for the classic series companions, this is where all their character is. They get established in their first episode. We figure out who they are, what they're about, what's their backstory. But with Mel, we never get that. We jump straight into her being a companion with the 6th Doctor, and she's not developed. She's not developed enough. Because when Mel was reintroduced in the new series, I was really hoping we'd get to know her a bit more. Maybe establish her character and really get to know her. But unfortunately, with the Russell T Davies 2 era, it feels like there's a million companions on screen. With Unit, there's too many characters. There's not enough time to really get to know Mel. What we found out was that, her family's missing, but we really don't get to know anything about that. It doesn't really get explored too deeply. So we really don't get to know Mel really anything more than we already did. It's in the same sense that we know that Mel is apparently good at computers. That gets mentioned once in the classic series, and it's like her family in the new series, it gets mentioned once or twice that she doesn't have a family anymore. And that's it. There's no real depth to it. It's just kind of surface level. So I feel like Mel is rated lower than she should be. I think Bonnie Langford is great, and I think she's a really great actor as well, and she hasn't really been given the actual scripts to let her shine. So unfortunately, Mel is a lot lower, which is really disappointing because I was hoping she'd go up when she came back, but it is what it is. I like that Mel got to travel with the 6th Doctor and the 7th Doctor because, the dynamic is very similar between the two, but between the 7th Doctor and Mel, it feels more loving and it feels more father-daughter vibes. There seems to be like a genuine affection for each other. Mel is so excited to be traveling in the TARDIS. It feels like they're like, all right, in the past, everyone's too miserable. Let's add some levity. Let's make it a bit more happy. But then they take it too far. They're like, bring me Bonnie Langford, the most positive person on the planet. And it just feels kind of comical. I just wish there were a bit more moments of grey with her character, and I think she would be loved a bit more. Next up, we have Ace. Ace is probably one of the best Doctor Who companions of all time for me. I think she really establishes what a companion is from here onwards. Because of Ace, we get characters like Rose. Because as soon as we really meet Ace, in her first proper season, Remembrance of the Daleks, after her debut in the previous season, there is a real shift in the show. It feels like Ace is the main character, along with the Doctor, of course, but the show is starting to be told through her lens. And her character's so fun and interesting. She has this rocky relationship with her mother, to the point where she hates her, and that gets explored as the series goes on. Because a lot of the critiques about the classic series companions is that they're set up in the first episode and then we stop. But with Ace, throughout her run, the things that were established in that first episode are being brought up. In Dragonfire, we talk about how she was transported to this place in the far future, and that gets mentioned throughout her run in Curse of Fenric. We get to figure out why that happened. The things that are set up in her first episode aren't just forgotten about. They're brought up and they're a part of the story, and it makes her character evolve. The Doctor is once again in a professor scenario where he's teaching his young companion about the universe, similar to the 4th Doctor and Leela. But within this, there is a critique of that. There is a critique that the Doctor is manipulating her and how that's wrong. And it seems to be willing to explore those themes, and that's what makes Ace and the Doctor so exciting to watch. That's what makes it so different and what makes it feel so much more mature in its storytelling. And that's why I think the 7th Doctor's final 2 seasons are some of the best when it comes to character work. I think Sophie Aldred plays Ace so well. She is a character that is rough around the edges, but she's so enthusiastic. She's enjoying her time there, but she feels like a real, genuine person at their core. It's not like Mel where it can be so heightened that it feels fake. And even Ace's interaction with Mel in Dragonfire makes Mel feel more real because Ace is treating her at face value and saying, no, I like you, I'm going to protect you, I care about you. And there's a real genuine bond between the two. I think it comes down to Sophie and Sylvester's real life relationship that makes it feel even more connected and real as well. You can tell these two actors like each other. You can tell these two characters like each other. This era is just excellent, and Ace has a huge part to do with it. And let's quickly talk about Grace, the 8th Doctor's companion in the TV movie. I think Grace is brilliant. She definitely feels like Doctor Who's answer to Agent Scully. It feels very 90s. She is very much someone, she's a doctor, she has authority, she's willing to call the Doctor out. She's willing to say, you know what, I don't want to travel with you. I'm happy here, I've got a life of my own. And her and the Doctor's spark, it changes the show forever. The Doctor can now have romantic relationships with his companions. What does that look like? What does that mean? And it's just a really different feeling. It feels so different and more contemporary and very 90s of Doctor Who. Daphne Ashbrook is a brilliant performer, and I think her and Paul McGann have real good chemistry on screen. And it's sad that the rights of Grace are tied up, that they can't really do stuff with her character in Big Finish, because it would have been great to see the Eighth Doctor and Grace reunited, and it would have been great to see what that storyline would look like. And even better than that, it would have been great if there was at least one season of Paul McGann as the Doctor and Grace came back. That would have been great. It would have been so brilliant to see what 90s Doctor Who would have looked and felt like, because this TV movie just looks excellent. And it's interesting to see how the companion of Grace is written compared to something like Mel. 10 years earlier, how different those 10 years have changed, how that role is written and how women are written in Doctor Who as well. And I think it all really started with Ace. But there are elements of that in Tegan, in Sarah Jane Smith, in Barbara Wright. You've got stronger female characters throughout Doctor Who, but you can't ignore the fact that there is a lot of sexism in the role of the companion. And I think that's something that we should recognize and think about when we're talking about companions as well. And, even to the modern day, are companions being written in a sexist way to this very day? And that's something to think about as well. So that's the 1980s and the Paul McGann TV movie Companions. The era is starting off with, these companions that are from different worlds. You've got Adric and Nyssa from far distant planets. And you've got Tegan, who is grounding it back at home. And we're seeing this shift to move back to human companions from modern day Earth. We're moving away from the aliens of the 70s to the 80s of Earth. You're starting to see companions like Peri, Mel, Ace. They're all from Earth and they're grounding the show. And you can see why having an Earth-based companion can bring that sense of humanity back to the program, that maybe having just alien companions can make it a bit, alienating. But I think this era has some of the best classic series companions, especially when we're talking about Tegan, we're talking about Ace, we're talking about Nyssa. I love these three companions and I love the rest of the companions too. But there's something about Ace and Tegan specifically that really start to shape this era and redefine what a companion is in Doctor Who. And you can see why Chris Chibnall wanted to bring back Ace and Tegan, because they are the most fleshed out characters of the 80s. And it was great to see their return. And I wish there was more of it. I wish we got to spend more time with Ace and Tegan than just that one special. But I think Chris Chibnall did a good job of giving them quite enough to do in the story. They weren't just relegated to a cameo in the way that I feel like Mel does. I feel like Mel doesn't really have much to do in her appearances in the new series. But Ace and Tegan, I felt like they had a little bit more to do, and that was only one special. But yeah, love this era, love these companions. What do you think of my ranking list? Do you agree with it or am I completely off? Let me know in the comments section below. And next time, we're going to be talking about the entirety of the new series companions in one go. I thought about splitting it up into decades, but I thought, why not? Let's just talk about the whole new series. Let's just do it. So thank you for watching and I'll see you next time. All right, bye. That's a lot of companions. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Nez YouTube channel.